Well, welcome everyone to Lessons from the Field. Today we're featuring Don Raineri. Don's a graduate of our bachelor's in pharmacy in 1984, and then also the PharmD program in '86. He also did a fellowship at UIC. He is vice president for regulatory affairs for the Americas at Astellas Pharma, and really a great friend of the College of Pharmacy. Don has been very instrumental in our partnership with Astellas and students who are there as trainees, whether during their pharmacy program or afterwards. So Don, first of all, let me thank you for all of your service to the College of Pharmacy. As we have done in previous issues of this Lessons from the Field, we'll be asking Don some questions and gaining some insight from him about his career and his experiences, and hopefully those will benefit our students, alumni, and friends who might be listening. So Don, let's go ahead and get started. We usually start with just asking you to give us a brief overview of your career, maybe 3 minutes or so of time that you left from when you left school to what you're doing now.
Sure. So thank you so much, Glenn, for this opportunity. So when I left school, I stayed on at the university, as a matter of fact, and really had all intentions of pursuing an academic career in the university, teaching and doing research, with the original aspirations of becoming a tenured professor. But during my time there, I had an encounter with someone who was the president of a privately held startup pharma company and asked me, have you ever thought about a career in the pharmaceutical industry? And it really got me thinking about, it's one thing to work in an academic and teach, but making the difference in the life of a patient in terms of, drug development really piqued my interest. And so that was the beginning of my career in the pharmaceutical industry. I started out in a clinical capacity as a clinical research associate, helping to design clinical studies, case report forms, monitoring sites to capture the data, writing that up, and eventually putting that together in documents to support regulatory filings. And it was that initial exposure with some early meetings with the US Food and Drug Administration that piqued my interest in a career in regulatory affairs. So I have over 30 years of experience in regulatory affairs. And for those that don't know what that is, it's really the function that is the primary liaison with global health authorities. In the US, it's the Food and Drug Administration. And so, I lead, I'm the site head for the US. And I also have some additional responsibilities for the labeling function, the team that writes the global package inserts, the group that does the US advertising and promotion. So how we promote our marketed products to patients and healthcare providers. And then the global regulatory intelligence and policy function, so that we look at regulations, ensure that we're compliant, bringing those guidelines into our internal practices, and then helping to develop policy as it relates to areas of interest in terms of where our direction is moving from a drug development perspective. And so I've been doing I've been in industry for over 30 years and in regulatory affairs for over 25 years. I've been with Astellas for 17 years, and I've been a vice president for the last 7 years of my career at Astellas.
Great. Well, thank you for that. You have a huge scope of responsibility, Don. It's amazing to hear you describe that. So this next question might be a bit hard to answer, but a lot of times, students who, as they get interested in a career, want to know a little bit more about the details of day-to-day kind of work that you do. Can you describe that? I know that's probably changed a lot with the pandemic, but what do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so working for a global company and then having responsibility for a number of functions within the regulatory affairs organization. No 2 days ever look the same. My days start early, oftentimes because of global meetings. So I have colleagues in Europe and Asia, where there's a 14-hour time difference in Japan versus a 7-hour time difference. So this morning, for example, I started at 6 a.m. With a leadership team with my boss and his direct reports. My day will end with a pharma trade association meeting. I'm on the regulatory steering group, so it's where the heads of regulatory affairs have these quarterly meetings where we interact and we look at what's going on within the FDA, and how we can partner with the agency or how we can influence some of the areas of focus within the FDA. But I have one-on-ones with my staff. I have one-on-ones with my peers to stay connected to people in the legal team, people in the commercial organization. Being the site head for the US, I need to make sure that the commercial needs are represented in our development programs. I also participate in strategic reviews of regulatory strategies, so how we're going to ultimately get a drug through its development cycle and ultimately approved. I also get involved in escalation meetings. So for example, if there's an issue with how commercial wants to promote one of our drugs and there's a disagreement between commercial and regulatory, I often get engaged in those types of discussions and try to come to a mutual agreement or mutual understanding. So my days are very diverse, but in general, they're also very long just because I'm working in a global environment.
Yeah, that must be hard, but it sounds like it'd be really rewarding. And regulatory affairs is an area where we have had increasing interest, from students. I mean, it's a field that's grown a lot, I think, also. So there's a lot of opportunities.
It's grown a lot, and it's the training that the PharmD candidates receive from U of I is very amenable to a career because we have to review and interpret scientific data. Communications is a key. We oftentimes lead teams in terms of preparing them for health authority interactions. And so the skill set that they develop in the College of Pharmacy through their training and education, very, very adaptable to regulatory affairs.
Yeah, well, that's great to hear. Is there additional training or experiences that you'd recommend of students that might be interested in regulatory affairs, either while they're in school or afterwards, like postgraduate training that might position them to be even more competitive, looking for a career in that area?
Yeah, so the Drug Information Association, DIA, has a regulatory affairs certification program. And I think that's really, a great opportunity to get exposure and going through that program and getting that certification really, shows that you have an understanding. Regulatory affairs is one of those where you don't learn it by the book, you learn it by practice. So to get your hands on, but the DIA RAC certification, RAC certification, as they call it, I think is really a good foundation for people interested or young in their careers in regulatory affairs to really give them an advantage.
Okay, great. I know that you also take students on clerkship rotations, whether there would be the fourth year APPE rotations, and that would be in regulatory affairs as well.
Yes, so we take students, we've taken them for years, and then we also have the fellowship program. So where we typically, our 3 successful fellow recruits from UIC, and with our 4th starting August 1st. So excellent. It's also a great way to get exposure.
Yeah, so a lot of ways that students can get that experience and pursue a career there. So appreciate filling us in on that. So maybe going back to your career, um, are there were there certain people or events along the way that, I mean, you mentioned a little bit when you were at UIC, there was somebody who kind of influenced you in terms of the pharmaceutical industry, and then I think later probably more specifically regulatory affairs. Could you mention a little bit more about that? Or
Well, yeah, but I mean, there's two other people that I think were quite influential as well, and the first being in the community where I grew up, the local pharmacist. I grew up about 90 miles southwest of Chicago, and the local community pharmacist influenced me from a very young age to pursue a career in pharmacy. He had an independent pharmacy in my community, very respected person in the community. And I think, you know, when I saw his attention to the patients that he served, really left an impression on me. So I knew from a very young age that I wanted to be a pharmacist. And Bill is someone who followed my career. And to this day, I still, you know, have connections to him and his family. One of his daughters. So I get updates very regularly from him, and he has to be 90 now. And he only retired himself several years ago. So he's been very active in pharmacy. So he's really been a true role model for me. And then when I was at the university and, you know, finishing my bachelor's degree and really discerning what I wanted to do, kind of realized that I wanted to continue my education, and I wasn't quite sure if it was medical school, if it was a PhD, or if it was a PharmD. And one of my instructors in the pharmacy program really helped me to make that decision to pursue a PharmD degree, Mary Lee. And so Mary was a very influential, and you know, gave me tremendous support, tremendous feedback. And what I really liked about Mary was, you know, she was very direct in her feedback, and I think that really helped, you know, shape me in terms of pursuing a career as a PharmD. And yeah, so that was those are our two. And then again, you know, this individual, Bob Borgman, who kind of oriented me towards other opportunities with my degree. And I think that was certainly a catalyst for me to, you know, reach the position that I am now. So three very important people in my life from a career development perspective.
That's great to hear. I think we sometimes, it's good to reflect back sometimes on the folks that have influenced you in your career. And it's hard when you're in it as a student or early in your career to recognize the impact sometimes that people might have. But when you step back a little bit later, you realize you know, that the whole direction may be changed as a result of an interaction or somebody who took you under their wing. So
exactly,
to be able to thank them.
Exactly.
So you also mentioned a little bit some of the more decision making that you had along the way. That where was the bifurcation kind of into regulatory affairs? You said that was after you got into industry.
Right. So when I was doing, you know, the clinical work, and then when I realized, you know, when some of the data that was being generated was put into clinical reports, and those reports were then used to support filings for drug approvals. And one time, just by chance, I was asked, oh, do you want along with us to this FDA meeting and have a discussion about, you know, what the agency would want to see ultimately for approval. And so to go to that type of interaction and just see, you know, the direct communication with the FDA, you know, the strategic elements of that in terms of the planning, and then just trying to put together that puzzle, for lack of a better analogy, of what it would take to get from, you know, from a very early going into like a first in man to an ultimate new drug application, just putting that strategy together and piecing that puzzle together was very, very fascinating to me. And so that's how I made that transition.
Yeah, it sounds like, yeah, being in the room kind of where it happened in a way. And
Exactly.
it really must have turned a light bulb on.
Exactly.
Yeah, that sounds like a great experience. It kind of leads to the next question I was going to ask you, and maybe it's the answer to that, um, but in over your career, what's been the part that's been most satisfying for you? What's you know, things that really have kept you in it for 30 years and getting up and putting in these long hours that you do?
Yeah. So anytime you can work on a drug that ultimately gets approved for patients, that to me has been, that's my driver, right? So knowing that I'm making the difference in the life of a patient or a patient's family, and whether that be a drug that's more a drug of convenience for like the treatment of something like overactive bladder, or when it becomes a drug to treat, a serious and life-threatening disease like cancer, right? So I one of the products that I worked on was Tarceva, which is a drug for non-small cell lung cancer, and there's a specific population of patients with a specific genetic mutation. And in this particular subset of patients, the efficacy of the drug is overwhelming. And so to have had the opportunity to bring that specific indication for patients with EGFR activating mutations to the market,
Mhm.
and then getting through our commercial organization a letter from the daughter of a patient who basically said, it's because of your drug that my dad was able to walk me down the aisle on my wedding day. So knowing that you're working on a drug that isn't going to cure cancer, but if it can add some quality of life or extend some time that patients have with their families, I mean, those are the types of things that are really most meaningful to me.
Yeah, wow. That must have really been something to get that letter like that.
Yeah, it's very, very, very emotional, very meaningful.
Yeah. So maybe looking forward, what currently excites you about either your role or pharmacy more generally in pharmaceutical industry specifically, but you see, what changes do you see on the horizon that will impact you and or folks that might follow you in regulatory affairs?
Yeah, so for me, I've seen kind of the transition. A lot of the work that I did early on in my career was in small molecule drug development, and now so much of what we're doing is more in the cell and gene therapy space. And so really to look at those advancements, and yes, there are great complexities in developing those types of products, from a cell line therapy, from a manufacturing therapy. A number of those are used to treat, rare diseases as well. So I just think, where some of this biotech is headed is truly rewarding, because we are really bringing some products through some very unique formulations to patients where there's a huge, whether it's an orphan disease in terms of a small population of patients for a very serious and life-threatening disease. So working in that space and learning some of the nuances about those types of development programs and manufacturing programs, it's a continuous learning opportunity for me, and I think that's really what I find enriching, and it's what gets me up every day.
Yeah, I mean, really, it's revolutionary in drug discovery, right?
Exactly.
I mean, to be able to treat diseases that we never could before, and even though the number of people might be small, it significantly impacts their lives. And it's definitely very exciting, and just
Absolutely.
to keep up on the science of it, obviously keeps you motivated and interested. So
Exactly.
I can see the attraction. So maybe kind of turning back to where we started a little bit, but going back to our students or early graduates, you have this wealth of experience now, and what advice do you, what additional advice, because you've already given us some, but for those interested in following a path similar to yours, is there anything else you'd add to what you've said?
Yeah, I'm really big on leveraging connections. So like when I have students that come here, and they're here for 6 weeks, the objective isn't for them to learn everything they can about regulatory affairs in 6 weeks, but it's to make those connections with others in the industry to see what opportunities there are for pharmacists. So that's what I really think has led. Sometimes it's not what sometimes it's who So it's just making those connections, leveraging those questions. Don't be afraid to reach out and ask career advice. The community of pharmacists it's a very tight network, and we love students at Astellas, and we take them in many different areas here. And so just make as many of those contacts, leverage them, and I guess another piece of advice is don't be afraid to take some risk with pursuing an idea. And sometimes, your first job isn't going to be your ultimate job, but learn from that experience and try to discern really what interests you and identify connections that can help you reach that goal. But, when you're a student, look for those opportunities to get exposure to other areas outside of your traditional community and hospital pharmacy, if that's what interests you. Even if you don't get a rotation, I have had people call me and just ask me for advice, and I'm always willing to offer them advice. So not that I want 100 phone calls tomorrow or anything, but I'm more than willing to set aside some time. I've had students just come in for an hour or two or an afternoon just to kind of see what we do. I really, think, it's my responsibility to show just what options there are in industry for students that are interested.
Yeah, wow. Well, we appreciate that so much, Don. And I know you have a great team there of folks that can help with that as well. And as you were talking, I was thinking, the people that you mentioned that influenced your career, Bill and Mary Lee, and I know that there's people that would name Don Raineri as someone who influenced them, and I'm sure you'll.
Well, I'm flattered, but and it's a responsibility that I
Yeah, it is for all of us, for the next generation. You work so hard, and obviously there's a lot of enjoyment that you get out of that. But you wouldn't have been able to do this for 30 years, I don't think, if you didn't also have some balance in your life. So what kind of advice or tips do you have for people in that area? Like how do you balance all of this work that you're doing with your home life? And
yeah, I mean, it's hard. I mean, part of it, what makes it easy is I love what I do, right? So that really is the biggest asset. But I'm only going to be effective if I take care of myself. So I can't be running on empty. I've got to recharge my batteries, right? So for me, it's getting some time in the gym and working off some of that stress I may have in the day. So I always try to find some time. I like to do it first thing in the morning, but that's not always possible. But now when I'm working from home, I can block an hour and a half over a lunch hour on some days and get into the gym and do that. But I can't stress enough the importance of kind of shutting down, right? I think we all need that time to shut down, whether and taking a vacation, and don't make it a working vacation, and not checking your phone all the time or checking your email. One person does not make a company. So you can take that time, you can delegate your responsibilities, but it's really, really important to find that quality time with your family, with your friends, your loved ones, just to kind of recharge. And like I said, if you're running on empty, you're not going to be efficient in your job, in your relationships. So find that way to kind of recharge your battery, whatever that is. If it's meditating, if it is working out, just get out, take a walk, whatever, get some fresh air and kind of leave your electronics to the side, and block that time on your calendar. I think that's the big thing now, is put some time on there so that you're not in meetings all day, and really try to find that balance and create some separation, because it's, we roll out of bed, we're on our computers when we're working from home, and then we're on it until late in the evening. But you need to find that balance, and it's hard, but it takes practice and you'll get there.
Yeah, great advice. Are you still I know you were running marathons and
Well, I do like the Tough Mudders and those types of things. Yeah, I'm scheduled for one in August. I'm training for it now. I had a rotator cuff surgery last year, so I'm still working through that, but I'm going to be ready to go in August.
Okay. We'll look forward to hearing about that one. Well, Don, this has been great. Thank you so much for taking time, not just to do this, but all that you do for our students. I mean, we really appreciate what you do for all of our students. So thank you very much.